Hey guys, I found another Reddit story, and I actually found it really interesting reading it. So he opens his post with, I'm a 30-year-old male. I grew up with just my mom, and my whole life I was told my father died in a car accident 6 months before I was born. And last year, a $20 DNA test turned my entire life upside down. So growing up, it was just me and my mom, and she raised me on her own, and she did a good job. She worked hard, and she was present, and I never felt unloved. But there was always this quiet space where my dad should have been. And I grew up with a version of him that was built entirely out of what my mom told me. That he was kind and funny, and that he would have loved me. And that losing him was the hardest thing she ever went through. And I held on to that version of him my entire childhood like it was something precious. When I was 30, I did one of those ancestry DNA tests. Not for any deep reason, I just thought it would be interesting to know where my family came from on both sides since I had nothing from my dad's side, and I sent it off and forgot about it for a few weeks. And then the results came back and I sat down to go through them, and right at the top of my matches was a close family member I had never heard of. And the label next to the match said half-sibling. I just stared at my screen because that didn't make any sense to me, like my mom was an only child. So it wasn't coming from her side, which meant it was coming from my dad's side, which meant my dad had had another child, which meant my dad had been alive long enough after my parents were together to have another child with someone else. And I felt this strange dizzy feeling because the timeline my mom had given me my whole life was starting to look very different. I reached out to the half-sibling through the app. His name was Aaron. He was 26, and he replied within a day, and he was friendly and curious. And he told me his dad's name was Robert and that he had grown up with him, and that his dad had mentioned he had been in a serious relationship when he was young, that it ended badly, but that he had never talked about it much. And I typed back and asked Aaron what his dad's last name was, and when he told me, it was the same last name my mom had always told me. I had to put my phone down and walk around my apartment for about 10 minutes. I called my mom that night and I kept my voice completely calm, and I told her I had done a DNA test and that I had found a half-sibling, and I asked her if there was anything she needed to tell me. And the silence on the other end of the phone was the longest silence I have ever experienced. And then she said, I can explain, and those two words confirmed everything. What she told me that night was that she and my dad Robert had broken up during the pregnancy because things had been bad between them and she had not wanted him involved, and that she had told him she had lost the baby because she felt it was cleaner that way. And she had moved to a different city before I was born. And she said she had told me he was dead because she thought it was easier than the truth and that she never expected me to find out. I want to tell you that I handled that phone call with grace and maturity, but I didn't. I said some things I'm not proud of. And then I told her I needed time, and I hung up, and then I sat on my kitchen floor for probably an hour just processing the fact that my father was alive and had been alive my entire life and had a son and a whole family and had no idea I existed. I talked to Aaron more over the next few days, and I told him everything I had found out, and he went and spoke to his dad and called me back, and his voice was different when he called, quieter. And he told me his dad had been completely silent when he heard and that he had just sat down in his chair and put his head in his hands. And then Aaron said his dad wanted to know if I would be willing to meet him, and I said yes before he even finished the sentence. We met at a coffee shop in a city halfway between where we both lived, and I got there first and I sat at a table facing the door, and when Robert walked in, I recognized him immediately, because I had my mom's old photos, and I had been staring at his face my whole life thinking I was looking at a ghost. And he stopped when he saw me, and I could see him trying to hold himself together, and I was doing the same thing, and then he just said, "You look exactly like your grandmother," and I completely lost it. We sat there for 3 hours and we talked about everything, what he had been told, what I had been told, the years in between, and at some point he reached into his jacket pocket and put something on the table and slid it across to me, and it was a photo, worn at the edges, like it had been handled a lot. And it was a photo of my mom when she was young, and on the back, in his handwriting, it said her name and the year, and underneath that, it said, "The one that got away." And he told me he had carried it for 30 years, because he had spent 30 years thinking she was the woman who had lost his baby, and he had never fully gotten over it. I drove home that day feeling like I was a completely different person than the one who had driven there that morning. And over the next few weeks, I had a long and very difficult series of conversations with my mom, and I won't pretend they were easy because they weren't. And I still have complicated feelings about what she did that I don't think are going anywhere quickly. But I also have a father now, and a half-brother, and a whole side of a family I never knew. And my son, who is 4 years old, has a grandfather who tears up every single time he sees him. Robert and I talk every week now, and last month he came to visit, and we spent a whole weekend together. And at one point, we were sitting on my back porch just talking. And he said, I missed everything. And I said, you're here now. And we just sat with that for a while. He ends his post with this. My mom made a decision 30 years ago that she thought was protecting everyone, and instead it just created a silence that lasted 3 decades, and the only thing that broke it was a random Tuesday night and a $20 DNA test. That ending just gets me every time, because it wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a legal battle or a perfectly timed revenge. It was just the truth finally having nowhere left to hide. And I think about all the families out there with silences like that one. All the versions of people that exist in gaps that nobody talks about. And sometimes it only takes one small thing to open the whole thing up and change the story completely. Drop it in the comments if this one hit you differently. I read every single one, and I'll see you in the next one.